It's a regular night. You're on the couch with your sister. MTV is on, life is good. And then this happens.
This is a test. For the next 60 seconds, the station will conduct a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test.
And just for a second, before the voice came on, you didn't know if this was the one. That's what it was like growing up in the 1980s. The world might end on a Tuesday. MTV one second, a mushroom cloud the next. And everybody just kind of accepted that. Growing up in the 80s was an interesting thing because it was a happy, incredible time, but there always was this possibility of nuclear war. It crept into culture, movies, songs that we sang that had lyrics we didn't quite understand, and we even had old signs on schools, basement doors, and even grocery stores if I remember right. So today I want to talk about 10 things that were a constant reminder that the end of the world was a possibility. And I want to be clear about something. This wasn't some fringe thing. Definitely everybody was in on this. This wasn't your crazy parent or your weird uncle that had a bomb shelter. This was a legitimate fear. Everybody talked about it from time to time and it was part of our world. So here's the list. 10 things that reminded us regularly that it could all go sideways at any minute. Number 10, Terminator 2, the playground scene. So I'm going to start with something a little bit outside of the era we're talking about. By 1991, when the Terminator 2 came out, the Cold War was wrapping up. The Berlin Wall had come down in '89, the Soviet Union was on its way out, and most of us had started to relax again. And then James Cameron made Terminator 2. My friends and I were so hyped for Terminator 2, and it did not disappoint. Terminator 1 was awesome, but remember Sarah Connor in Terminator 2? I remember when they showed her and she was just buff doing chin-ups. This was also during the peak bodybuilding era. I know Raquel McClish was like a bodybuilder that women were into, or Corey Everson, and then Arnold, obviously. Anyway, the scene I'm talking about was Sarah Connor at the chain link fence at the playground watching her past self push her son on a swing. And then there's a big flash. The kid on the swing turns to ash. Sarah's skeleton's holding onto the fence as a shockwave hits. I remember sitting in that theater thinking that was something we had moved past. I think I was 21 at the time, but there was part of me thinking about when I was like 11 or 12 and first learning about the horrors of nuclear war. So although Terminator 2 was past this era, it reminded us that there was still danger there. And that's why it's number 10. It's the final reminder of something that we thought that we were done with that was still a possibility. Number 9, the songs Two Tribes, 99 Luftballons, and Forever Young. So look, I don't want to get a copyright strike, so I'm not going to be playing any of these songs for you in this video, but I do want you to remember what these songs are in case you forgot. But if you're Gen X, you know what's up. You know these songs. But for those of you not familiar with these songs, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to take my beautiful, vintage, 56-year-old singing voice and sing one line from each of these songs a cappella. Prepare to be blown away. When two tribes go to war, a point is all that you can score. Floating in the summer sky, 99 red balloons go by. Let's dance in style, let's dance for a while. Heaven can wait, we're only watching the skies. Hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Are you gonna drop the bomb or not? Yeah, I'm the guy they invite up when they're trying to close the karaoke bar down early. In my head, it sounds so much better, though. Alright, now we got that important stuff out of the way, let's talk about the songs. So let's talk about Two Tribes first. The video is awesome. The music video featured Reagan and Soviet leader Chernenko wrestling with each other in a pit. It's actually one of my favorite videos from the time. Now, on a side note, Frankie Goes to Hollywood was the very first concert I went to. I think it was in 1984. I was 14 years old. A friend bought the ticket. I don't claim that as my first concert because I didn't choose it. And we went there and it was the wildest concert I'd ever seen. There was like leather chaps and weird biker stuff and like whips and things. My friend's dad picked us up and he's like, "Hey boys, how was the show?" And we didn't even know where to start. It was a crazy concert. I claim The Cure is my very first concert because I bought the tickets. I was 15, and that's my favorite band of all time, tied with New Order, so I still don't claim Frankie Goes to Hollywood as my first concert. Anyway, back to the story. So 99 Red Balloons, I knew that was about nuclear war, but I didn't really realize how the balloons fit into the whole thing. The song is about red balloons floating into Soviet airspace, getting mistaken for an enemy attack, and triggering a nuclear war. Everybody dies at the end. Good times. And the song Forever Young is one of my all-time favorite songs, and if you listen to the lyrics, it is about nuclear war, but I don't choose to remember it like that. The song came out in 1984. I was 14 at the time, and it just has this beautiful sound to it. And although it's about nuclear war, it just reminds me of being young. I was young at the time, and I'm not young anymore. So it has this nostalgic feel to it that just gets to me. I love this song. So in the 80s, these apocalyptic nuclear war songs were played on the radio. You just couldn't avoid the subject even if you wanted to. Number 8, Missile Command. I lived in the arcades as a kid. We had a mall close to us, and I was in there all the time. Missile Command came out in 1980, and it's one of the better arcade games from that time. You're defending cities from incoming nuclear missiles, and it sounds like a straightforward game, but there's kind of some lore behind it. The designer's name was Dave Therer, and he said the project gave him cold sweat nightmares for 6 months while he was making it. He was actually having nuclear war dreams every night while building this game. When you play this game, you're reminded that there's no winner in nuclear war. You can't win this game. You can't defeat it. And when you lost in Missile Command, the screen does not say game over. It says the end. And if I remember properly, it says the end, but then there's like this growing nuclear blast that kind of fills the screen after it says the end. It was just a stark reminder of the possibility of nuclear war. Number 7, War Games. War Games came out in the summer of 1983. I remember going home at the time and on my Commodore 64 programming my own version of that little chat that they have in the movie of, do you want to play a game? An interesting thing I just found out today was when the movie came out, Ronald Reagan watched it at Camp David, and then he asked the generals, could this really happen? And they came back and said, yes, sir, it could. So this movie had a pretty big impact. The film ends with the computer working out that nuclear war has no winning outcome. The only winning move is not to play. Number 6, the 1984 Olympics boycott and the McDonald's promotion. This one's different from everything else on the list because there's a happy memory attached to it. In 1984, the Soviet Union boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics. And I was kind of bummed out when that happened because I remember the Soviet Union, they would wear these red uniforms and they seemed taller and athletic and they had very serious looks on their faces. It was just fun to compete against them, but that wasn't happening. But it wasn't all bad news because McDonald's ran a promotion that summer called When the U.S. Wins, You Win. Here's how it worked. When you bought a meal, you got a scratch-off card tied to a game at the Summer Olympics. So you'd get like a weightlifting scratch card, or you could get 100 in that event. You got a free Big Mac. If the U.S. won a silver medal in that event, you got free French fries, and a bronze medal, you got a free soft drink. So when McDonald's made this game, the USSR was supposedly going to be going to the Olympics to compete against us, and they were our biggest rivals, so they would be taking about half of these spots that we ended up winning. McDonald's based their prizes and they set up their game with the idea that the U.S. would win 94 medals. But instead of winning 94 medals, the U.S. ended up winning 174 medals, 83 of them gold. We won so many gold medals that a lot of locations ran out of Big Macs. And it gets even worse for McDonald's. So let's say you bought a Big Mac and fries and a Coke and you got a card and you scratch it off and the U.S. won a gold medal in that. You would then get a free Big Mac, but they would give you another card with your Big Mac. So you scratch that off and you get another Big Mac. So they give you another Big Mac with another card that possibly could have been a Big Mac or a fries or a Coke. Let's say you won a fries. Now you get your fries, you get another card. That's a Big Mac. And it was like an infinite Big Mac loop it was just crazy. Honestly, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but up until this point in my life, it was one of the greatest things that had ever happened to me. We didn't care that there was global tensions and a Cold War behind it. We were just jazzed to be getting free Big Macs. It was incredible. Number 5, Red Dawn. Red Dawn came out in the summer of 1984. Now I think about it, so much stuff happened in 1983 and 1984. Really busy years. Anyway, it was the first PG-13 movie ever released, and it changed the way we thought of the Cold War because it showed an invasion on the U.S. So you see these paratroopers come down into a high school, and the teacher goes outside to see what's happening, and he gets gunned down with a machine gun. It was a shocking start to a movie, but I kind of want to watch it again because I haven't seen it since it came out in the theaters. It really hit home because it showed a school in the United States getting invaded. And then it showed detention camps where the parents were being held. And then a group of kids fled to the forests and they brought guns with them. They called themselves the Wolverines. And I grew up in the Northwest and we had woods and things like that around our school. So it reminded me of my situation and kind of gave me nightmares at the time. But I'll never forget this movie and the thoughts I had during the movie about this being a possibility. You know, we were still in a Cold War. Something like this could possibly happen. Number 4, fallout shelter signs and the civil defense sirens. So first let's talk about the fallout shelter signs. These were designed in the early 60s, and I believe they were placed at that time too. These signs were black and yellow and it had that nuclear symbol on it. They were typically made of aluminum or galvanized steel and measured around 10 to 14 inches or 14 by 20. So thousands of buildings were marked by the mid-60s and in high-density areas, and then it started to slow down in the 70s. But these were still all over the place in the 70s and 80s. I just remember these were just kind of in the background of our lives in the 70s and 80s. We'd never really paid attention to them. They just, every once in a while, you'd see one. The civil defense sirens were mounted on utility poles all throughout neighborhoods. And in some places, I guess they tested them the first Wednesday of the month at noon. I don't believe they did that in my area. I do remember hearing them a couple of times, but definitely not monthly. But the sound of the sirens gives you chills kind of. Like it cranks up slowly and then reaches a peak level and it goes for a little while and then it kind of cranks down. It's a very eerie sound. And during the test, the sirens come on first, and then the voice announces that there's a test over speakers typically.
This is a test.
But there's about a 2 to 3 second gap where you're not positive if this is a test or if this is the real thing. That 2 second gap between when it starts and when the announcer comes on, there is, just that little feeling of like, hey, maybe this isn't a drill. So again, this wasn't something we focused on all the time. It just was that constant reminder that there was a possibility that something bad could happen. Number 3, Chernobyl. A Soviet nuclear reactor in the Ukraine exploded in April of 1986. It's been almost exactly 40 years. The initial blast killed 2 workers immediately, but in the days that followed, 28 more died from acute radiation exposure. The thing that really hit the news, though, was a cloud was moving and other countries started to detect it. And people in Europe started to worry about radiation poisoning, and it just made the whole thing global. I do remember it being a terrible situation, and watching the movie recently just reinforced that idea. It just shows you how careful we need to be with nuclear power. Number 2, the emergency broadcast system. All right, we're back to where we started in this video. That sound, 2 tones held for about 35 seconds, and then the voice. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. Between 1976 and 1996, that system activated roughly 20,000 times. Never once for a nuclear emergency. Every single time it was a test or a weather alert or some non-nuclear event. But every single time before that voice came on, you didn't know that yet. The emergency broadcast system tone is number 2 on this list because it was the most regular, most consistent reminder that all of this was real. Red Dawn showed you what it might look like at your school. Missile Command told you the end was coming no matter what. But the EBS tone showed up in your actual living room on a random weeknight between TV shows. It made you think about it whether you felt like it or not. There was no opting out. It just came on. Number 1, the movie The Day After. November 20th, 1983. ABC aired a TV movie called The Day After. Roughly 100 million people watched it. That's close to half the country. I believe it was an assignment because every single person watched this that was my age back in the day. It was so intense they even set up 1-800 number counseling hotlines during and after the broadcast because they knew what was coming. Ted Koppel hosted a panel immediately after with Carl Sagan and Henry Kissinger to help people process what they had seen. The movie's set in Lawrence, Kansas. It's not a fictional place, a real city. The missiles launch, the warheads detonate, and then the film spends the rest of its runtime on the people who survived the initial blast. It's not easy to watch. And in some ways, surviving is worse than the alternative, and the film does not look away from that. I remember watching it, and at one point it looked like it was snowing, and I didn't know what that was, and I guess that was nuclear fallout. Ronald Reagan watched a screening and wrote in his diary that it left him, quote, greatly depressed. It's credited with having a genuine influence on nuclear arms negotiations in the years that followed. I actually had nightmares from it. I really did. And schools talked about it on Monday morning. Now, one movie I didn't see, I did want to make note of. If we thought The Day After was rough, the British made a film in 1984 called Threads, set in Sheffield. It showed everything that The Day After chose not to show. But for those of us in the U.S., The Day After is number 1. It's that shared Sunday night experience of Gen X. Okay, I want to bring it back to something. At the start of this video, I talk about being on the couch with your brother or sister, MTV on a regular night, and then that sound. This is how it worked. It wasn't like we were scared all the time with this. It was just there was these little reminders. You had your life, you watched MTV, you played Atari, you went to school, you went to dances, you worried about normal kids things. But then something would cut through, a sound, a movie your parents and teachers made you watch. This is what this generation carried. Not a constant panic, just this thing that was always on in the background. The knowledge that it all could go sideways on a Tuesday and nobody had the power to stop it. No adults, no leaders. Nobody was fully in control of this thing. So that's the list. 10 things. 10 moments when a generation of kids looked up from whatever they were doing and thought, yeah, this might actually happen. The good news, most of us made it. The missiles stayed in the ground, the sirens were always tests. But those 2 to 3 seconds before the voice came on, I'll never forget that feeling.